So in our first phase, which started in 2004, the Blue Ribbon Task Force had to be convened. It was appointed by the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. And one of their first tasks was to develop what we call the Master Plan Framework. And an important piece of that was guidelines that were developed by the Science Advisory Team on the design of marine protected area networks. And these weren't saying you need to have 20%, you need to have 15%. They instead gave it general guidelines on the dimensions. Then in step 3, there was a pilot project. And one of the things that we did, rather than trying to do the whole state at once, the state was broken into 4 regions. And we started in the Central Coast region, just north of where I live, with a pilot project. And the idea there was to convene a stakeholder group. There were about 50 or 60 people from a wide range of backgrounds to develop alternatives. Those alternatives were then presented to the Blue Ribbon Task Force and the science team, both of whom commented on them. The regional stakeholder group went back, made adjustments. They presented them to the Blue Ribbon Task Force again. There was another round of comments, and then there was a final round where the stakeholder group presented their options, and there were 3 of them, and the Blue Ribbon Task Force selected what they regarded as their preferred alternative, which they then forwarded to the Fish and Game Commission, which later adopted something very close to that. So the regional stakeholder group, I want to spend a little bit of time on this. First of all, selection. The regional stakeholder group was selected through a process of nomination by stakeholders, interviews by facilitators, and then a final selection by the Department of Fish and Game and the chairman of the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And as the person who was managing the budget, you can imagine my feeling when we started off with a plan for 30 stakeholders and ended up with 60. But that's what was required in order to have a credible process. As I said, they represented a wide range of interests, but one of the things that we learned from the first phase to the second phase is that we needed to be careful about having people who could negotiate. It wasn't enough to represent an interest. It was critical that you also be able to negotiate. There was professional support, and this will give you some idea of the kind of professional support there is. We've developed a number of tools. What you see on the right-hand side there is work that was done by EcoTrust through interviews with commercial and recreational fishermen to identify the areas that are most important to commercial fishermen. This information is used by the regional stakeholder group to identify areas or boundaries on MPAs to minimize impacts. This is an MPA design tool that I'm particularly excited about, and I have the web address at the end of the final slide. But this is the tool that stakeholders use to design alternative MPAs. And when they do that, they get a quick read as to whether or not they fit the Science Advisory Team guidelines. Stakeholders are able to use this in the meetings, but they are able to use this via the web between meetings. So small groups have formed to develop alternatives. So the Central Coast design process this gives you an idea of the number of meetings. All of the meetings were facilitated, and they were all webcast. They were all open to the public, and the materials for each meeting were available on the web before the meeting. So anyone who said that they did not have an opportunity to plug into this process must have been living in a cave, because there was every effort, every opportunity there were also lots of small meetings as well. Yeah.
Are people good with Mike taking 5 minutes of the question period? Yes. Good? Good.
So I'll wrap this up, I hope, even more quickly. So this is just to give you an idea of what came out of this process. So on the Central Coast, we started with marine protected areas, about 43 square miles, and they were a real hodgepodge. Through a process that took about 18 months, this network was developed, and it covers roughly 204 square miles, or about 18% of state waters. On the north central coast, where we are now, you see San Francisco Bay in the middle there, there were 27 square miles of marine protected areas when the process started. And that process is entering its final stages at the Fish and Game Commission. This is what you see as the preferred alternative, and it's 154 square miles. So this is a very, very intensive process. There's fairly broad support within the stakeholders for the range of alternatives that were presented. So let me end with some lessons learned. First of all, I want to emphasize that how important it is to look at the region within which you are operating and have a clear picture of what the capacities and the deficiencies are among the various institutions, and that's both governmental and non-governmental, and try to be very, very clear about that. Clarify roles and responsibilities. That's just been absolutely critical all up and down the line. The regional stakeholder group, for instance, realizes that they are not the final decision makers, and that's critical. But they have a huge role to play. Interests need to be represented, and we have a very, very broad range of interests who are represented on the regional stakeholder group, not just those that you usually expect to be there, the fishing industry, NGOs, but also people from local governments, from county governments, harbor districts, and whatnot. You need to provide support to the process, and you can do a lot to enhance the success of a process by doing so. Value information in all of its forms, whether it's peer-reviewed or not. In a process like this, it's really critical. Encourage learning, and that's up and down the whole process. And I think that that's something that at every stage we've tried to do, and there's been some success. We believe in identifying products. We don't want a process that just goes on and on and on, and we also set deadlines. And finally, learn and adapt. We take a very, very conscious approach to, at the end of each phase of each MPA design process, of bringing in outside consultants to look dispassionately at what that process has done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and we continue making adjustments. And for instance, one of the things that we've done is in Southern California, we independently provided a grant to the Commercial Fisheries Coalition in order to enhance the ability of fishermen, small-scale fishermen in this very large region, to tap into this process. And they were feeling very, very frustrated about it.